Welcome back. As I always start these things, I want to start off by going back to the last episode when I was talking about Trevor Bauer and stuff like that, and just make a reference to that. We'll talk about a story that made me think of that. Over the weekend, I heard Karen Steffens, who's also known as Superhead to people that don't know because of her fellatio skills. She was on a podcast. It was called The Salon with Leela Milan. I want to give her credit for that. And Superhead, Karen is her name. She's known for writing a couple of books detailing her sexual experiences with various celebrities and such. And the reason that I bring this up is because I talked about the interesting things that make sex enjoyable to different people. And on that podcast, she was talking about an incident that she had with Trey Songz. And she talked about how Trey Songz actually tried to pee on her, which is funny to me. And it's funny because it seems like anybody that Trey Songz like has an encounter with, they want to talk about it publicly because I've also heard stories from women that talked about how Trey wanted to spit in their mouths and stuff like that. And they didn't say it was a bad thing. They didn't say it, they didn't enjoy it. I mean, Karen said that she didn't allow Trey to pee on her, but she wasn't saying it like she was gonna go call the law because he wanted to. That was just his thing and it wasn't her thing. And the women that talked about him wanting to spit on them, they weren't complaining like it made him a bad person or anything like that. That was just his thing and it wasn't their thing. So, and that's whether that's true or not, it made me think about the whole the Trevor Bauer episode and just how different people like different things. It was just interesting to me. So I just thought I'd start off the show by mentioning that. So moving on, okay, to what I want to talk about today. I was watching an interview with let's call her an adult film actress. Her name was Angel Kelly. In case anybody wants to look her up, I'm not really familiar with her work, but it is what it is. But the reason I was watching the interview is because she was talking about Tupac, specifically an encounter that she and a few other adult film actresses had with Tupac. And hold on, before I continue, let me just say this. And I know some of you cats want to fight me and all that, but don't get me wrong. Tupac had one of my favorite albums of all time, strictly for my, let's say, N words for the purposes of this podcast. But all in all, honestly, I thought he was overrated as a rapper. Beyond that one album, which again was one of my favorite albums of all time, and then another song here and there, like when my homies call, is another good song of his. I I think some of y'all cats, I think y'all mix up and confuse like the rapper Tupac with like the societal figure Tupac, the dude that shot the cops and was a hero for that, and would say all these things about Black unity and all of that, and Black Panthers and his moms and all that. I think some of y'all like blend the two and make Tupac into something that's like bigger than he actually is, to be honest. It's like if you strip away all of the Tupacness and focus on just the music and specifically like his lyrical abilities, if you're being honest with yourself, you'd have to agree that he's lacking. Like, okay, like what's Tupac's line? Like, what's the line from a Tupac song that you hear people reciting? What's like his lyric? What's his iconic lyric, that says, okay, this is Tupac. I'll wait. Actually, nah, I can't wait because time is money when it comes to recording this, so I can't wait. But with that said, if you come up with what it is or you figure out what one is, please feel free to email me at michael at datingwhileadulting.com because I want to know what that is because off the top of my head, I can I cannot think of one. And when I talk about Tupac, there were two Tupacs. There was the Tupac, well, there were three. There was a Digital Underground Tupac, which was the lesser known Tupac. Then there was a solo Tupac with Tupacalypse Now, and then Strictly for My N Words. That was the best Tupac, those two albums. And then he got arrested, went to jail, and came back and was Death Row Tupac. I thought Death Row Tupac was really whack. But It's neither here nor there. Like people like compare him to Biggie, and it's like for obvious reasons because they had that whole beef, East Coast, West Coast, and all of that. But come on, when you talk about the music, there's no comparison whatsoever. It's like even though Big's catalog wasn't as big, Big's catalog wasn't as big. That's funny to me. Okay. He did more in those two albums than Tupac did in his whole entire career. And again, I'm just talking about musically and specifically lyrically. Like looking back at it, would have been like more of a brand, to use today's terms. Like Biggie was an artist. Like Tupac, I feel, would have been like Tupac regardless. He just kind of like fell into rap and just figured that that was the best way to build his brand. Not to say it was a conscious decision, but that's the way I look at his career when talking, and specifically when talking about how he was as a lyricist. Like Big, he was rap. Big was hip hop. It's like, yeah, there's no comparison. Like I said, I'm not going to get any deeper than that. I don't even think I need to get any deeper than that. You all can fight me later if you want to, but it's a losing battle on your part. Anyway, anyway, getting back to the story about the adult actress, because that's the point of this whole thing. According to her, Tupac had several actresses in his room, and this was after they recorded the "How Do You Want It" video with Casey and JoJo, which she says they shot earlier in that day. So they were in Tupac's hotel room. It was Tupac. There were several other adult actresses that were in the video, and then there was one other guy in the room with them. And the other guy in the room is the reason that I'm talking about all of this stuff, and you won't even guess who the other guy was. And I won't even make you guess. I hate when people do that to me, talk about guess what happened to me and all that stuff, as if you would really have any idea. So I won't put you through that. But the other guy in the room was the boyfriend of one of the adult actresses. Nina Hartley is the actress's name, in case you want to look her up. And on that night, Nina Hartley's boyfriend, watched Tupac have sex with Nina. His girlfriend, Nina Hartley, he watched Tupac knock her down along with a few other adult actresses in the room, but specifically his girlfriend. Now, interesting. Now, this happened in the 90s, and allegedly, according to Angel, she was in the room. She was one of the people that claims to have had sex with him, along with Nina, while her boyfriend watched. But what's interesting about the story, besides the obvious, is that you hear more and more about things like that happening today, even though that happened back in the day. Not necessarily about rappers having sex with actresses in front of their boyfriends, but basically different definitions of what makes a relationship successful, different definitions of relationships, basically. And for the record, the practice of watching your girlfriend or wife have sex with another guy or vice versa is referred to as cuckolding. And just the fact that there's an actual name for it speaks to the fact that this practice has to be more common than any of us would probably think, anybody that's outside of that world. And that speaks to how people more and more are choosing to define relationships differently than they did back in the day. Like back in the day, um, people saw their parents, or more so their grandparents, and how their relationships looked. And without even questioning it, they just followed suit. Like if that worked for grandmom and granddad, then surely it'll work for me. And what people found out eventually, and what people are finding out in their own marriages, is that though that their own marriages and relationships didn't quite work out the same way as their parents, or more specifically their grandparents relationships worked. Now, that could be for a few reasons, including like all you really knew about your parents and grandparents relationships, the ones that were successful, was that they were together for like 300 years or however long. You really don't know any details of how the relationships worked out. Just the fact that they're together doesn't really like tell you anything except for they're together. Like back in the day, they kind of had to stay together because the times weren't too kind, specifically weren't too kind to black people in those days. And they definitely weren't kind to women because even a black man, as bad as he had it, black women, many can argue, and successfully so, that black women had it even worse. And so women back in the day, they had to put up with all of the stuff that their husbands would like throw at them, things that they're not willing to put up with today, things they definitely wouldn't be willing to put up with today. Also, back in those days, the roles of each person, they were a lot more clear. It's like whether you wanted to fulfill that role or not, that was your role and you didn't have a choice. That was your duty. And you better not do anything to mess it up. Like these days, with more and more women specifically rebelling against those roles while wanting to maintain the men's roles, which is a whole different story from back in those days. That's just like a recipe for disaster today. Also, back in those days, societies were a lot less open minded than they are today, which goes to the cuckolding thing, apparently. So, the thing back in the day and even now is to follow this cookie cutter model, regardless of whether it makes you happy or not. As long as you like have the appearance and do these things to give that appearance is cool. Happiness be damned. Like back then, the goal was to be married, not necessarily to be happy. And that was the gist of it. And today, thankfully, people are placing more value on happiness and less on those ideals of marriage. And while I've personally found that people still want to be married today, and that includes me, more people are reevaluating what marriage is supposed to be like. Now, that does create a little bit of a problem when it comes to finding your partner, that partner of the same mindset with a comparable set of criteria. At least back in the day, there was like structure of what a marriage looked like. Everybody had their role and you followed your role. And at least that was a structure. And if you wanted to navigate from it, away from it, well, you really couldn't navigate from it. But at least there was something there. But nowadays, there's not that at all. There's no real structure, there's no skeleton outline to follow. You just have to figure it out if, in this day and age, you want a successful marriage. Like I said earlier, like many women, they want the man to maintain those roles of our grandfathers, but they don't want to maintain the roles of the grandmothers for themselves. And because I'm not just banging on women, conversely, there are many men out here, they don't want to maintain the roles of their granddads, at least the more serious roles of our granddads. Like a guy he doesn't want to go out and be the sole breadwinner like granddad did. He's not feeling that. But he'll do those like little things, like he'll walk on the outside when y'all are walking down the street, stuff like that. So the guy wants to do the things that really don't matter in the grand scheme of marriage, but he will hold on to those things that give the appearance of old school male responsibility and stuff like that without like agreeing to do the heavier lifting stuff. And so that's the guy. Honestly, that's what a guy wants to do. I honestly don't know what women want to do these days. And I'm not saying any of it's bad. You want what you want, whether others agree or not. And those that disagree, they just aren't the people for you. It's cool. But going back to the Tupac story, Nina Hartley, the woman that Tupac had sex while her boyfriend watched, obviously had an understanding with her boyfriend. That's how they got down. And while that understanding might not work for you, it worked for them. And furthermore, I did some research on Nina. Yeah, but I did. Anyway, I did some research on Nina, and she's been married to her most recent husband since 2003. And she's been in the adult industry for most of that time. I'm imagining that she's retired now, considering she's like 61, but she was definitely in the adult industry during her marriage. And if they've been married for 18 years, they obviously have some sort of understanding of what works for them, or at least the appearance of it. After I went through that episode where people getting divorced after 20 years of marriage, I don't take anything for granted, but still, they have an understanding of what works for them, or at least they did, or whatever. They came to an agreement, which was definitely non traditional. And even while I'm doing the online thing, it speaks to how more and more people are, you know, thinking outside of the box when it comes to their relationships and marriage. It's funny, I'm coming across more and more profiles when I'm looking online of women who are upfront that they are stating that they're poly, for example. And for people that don't know, poly just means that they're involved with multiple partners. And so it's not like you're just sleeping with different dudes. It's basically you're having full on relationships with different dudes. And conversely, men can do it with different women or whatever, or men with men, whatever, different partners. So it's more than just sex. Yeah, you're having full on relationships. And that's something that's more popular today, obviously, by the more and more profiles that I'm seeing. And to prove, oh, before I even go to that, also I see more and more profiles from women who are talking about they're looking for somebody to join her and her husband in a three-way in some kind of way. So hey, what better way to find that than to go online? And these are things, again, that your grandparents definitely wouldn't have spoken about, your parents wouldn't have spoken about, but people are just like more open-minded and accepting that there are different ways to build a house, basically. And it's interesting because it apparently goes both ways. Like women apparently online are seeing more and more of this as well, because I am seeing profiles of women. Like there's the group that says, um, I'm poly, this is what I'm looking for. But I also see women in their profiles who are saying, if you're in the poly relationships or if you're in the swinging, don't click on my profile because I'm not into that. So that speaks to how they're coming across men who are saying the same things that I'm seeing from women. So, hey, men and women are both open about that, and hey, more power to them. I'm not. This is the no judgment zone. I am not knocking anybody's hustle. But with that said, it's like while those examples like cuckolding, swinging, polyamory, they all like have sexual components. I don't just bring them up as a way to just talk about sex on the low, even though it's strange. You people out there just pervs, because when I look at the numbers for these episodes, the ones that get the highest numbers are the ones when I talk about sex in some kind of way. Even even with that said, I'm not going to pander to those numbers. I just speak about whatever comes to my mind. Anyway, I bring those things up because sex is the one thing that people in relationships don't seem to discuss enough. It's like, I remember Reggie once told me, like, you have to find someone who's sexually compatible, that you're sexually compatible with, because that's the only thing you're not allowed to get someplace else. It's not like, it's like if your spouse doesn't like sports or something like that, you can always go to your homeboy or homegirl and get the fix that you need from them with regard to that. And when I hear that more and more people, whether it be the man or the woman, are dissatisfied with their sex lives, these are honest conversations that need to be agreed upon at the beginning, and not just saying, well, our sex life is good right now, so we're good. Because you have to think about like down the road, like what happens when one person, which inevitably happens, isn't as interested as you. Your sex drive isn't going to grow at the same rates as you get older. And that's regardless of whether it's the man that comes up short or the woman that comes up short. Somebody's going to lose interest. And then what do you do? Then you do go the Nina Hartley route, I guess. Anyway, but beyond but beyond but beyond just a sexual agreement, it's like, what about the other things, to speak about when talking about traditional roles back in the day, your grandparents' marriages versus yours and stuff like that. It's like, for me, for example, I'm not the traditional role guy where the guy is the leader, the provider, and protector, and all that mess. And the primary reasons for that are, well, I can see women just like, what? The primary reasons for that are, and like in all the conversations that I've had with women, and trust me, there have been many. I still, at 50 years old, have not gotten a clear understanding or explanation as to what those generic terms mean: leader, provider, protector. It's like somebody says, well, here's what I want you to do. These things, and I have the right to add or subtract from the meaning as I feel appropriate. And that's not really fair. It's like, I don't know what those things mean. I don't know what I'm getting into, but I just should trust that you're going to tell me eventually as we move down the road. So that's one thing. Like the other reason that I'm not the traditional role guy is because no woman has ever told me what I get, what's the reward for serving in all of those roles. So so women that I encounter, they can't define the roles, nor can they tell me like what the reward is for fulfilling those roles. Now, to the point about knowing the reward and fulfilling them, I've had several women tell me that that's my fault because I need to be more demanding of what I want the reward to be. And while that does make some sense, it's like, but when all you really want is peace, what do you say? It's like, should I just start demanding things like a celebrity like goes on tour and he puts stuff in a rider like I want a bowl of M&Ms with no green ones. Look it up if you don't know what I'm referring to. It's like just to make sure that they do the things. You don't really care, but you just ask for things just because you're doing things. That doesn't seem to really work for me. And then what if, when I talk about just wanting peace, what if my definition of peace is not having a spouse or a girlfriend add other burdens to me on top of what I already have in just being a black man? It's like I have to go out and fight during the course of the day and all of this and all of that. And then I have to come home and fulfill all of these obligations that you've placed on me on top of it. It just doesn't seem fair. It just doesn't seem equal. And it's not just me, part of, uh, talking about focusing on happiness as opposed to just being married and traditional thinking, our grandparents versus now, is more and more men are thinking the way that I am describing, which makes it all the more important that you find out what works for you. It's like, and I'll just say this on the side note. People always talk about how men die more quickly than women, even though women are catching up. You have to figure that that was the case back in the day, partially because of all of the added stress that our grandfathers had that our grandmothers didn't. But people can debate me on that. I don't say that with any kind of 100% assuredness or anything like that. So it's just something to think about, though. But with that said, hey, you do what you do. Like beyond the sexual things, though, I hear about other things that people do in successful marriages today that wouldn't even have been thought about back in the day. Like married couples more and more are choosing to live separately. I read an article about that. It's something that I've always talked about openly with friends from going way back. I personally feel that. Now, with that said, while I do like the idea of that, that is not something that I feel like I have to have in a marriage. Otherwise, I will be unhappy. And I also accept the fact that realistically, finding a woman that will agree to maintain separate households, yeah, I don't really think that that's something that. That talking about things that you have to bend on, I think that's something that I'll have to bend on, and that's fine. Also, talking about nouveau ways of making successful marriages and things like that. Women are like hyphenating their last name, something I alluded to in a couple podcasts earlier. They're hyphenating their last names, or in some cases, keeping their maiden names for whatever reason. They don't want to take their husband's names. And, is that a deal breaker? I mean, hey, if it makes you happy, do your thing. I also mentioned a couple episodes ago about Zoe Saldana's husband, the actress. Her husband took her last name. He dropped his, and now he's whatever, Mr. Saldana. So, and then when talking about modern ways of thinking and stuff, that obviously the obvious difference is in how money's handled. Like there are more and more stay-at-home husbands, which speaks to the fact that there are more and more women that are making more money than their husbands. Like Susan Rice's husband, for example. Um, Susan, look her up. Her husband quit his job, and he had a nice job to stay home with the kids when she started working in President Obama's administration. So that stuff, those things are things that would have been unheard of back in our grandparents' day. Would have been unheard of even in our parents' day, depending, I guess, on how old your parents are. So, it's just something to think about. It's like when I think about marriage, I just feel like putting everything on the table and like just start from scratch with a good old fashioned negotiation process. It's like if I put on the table, okay, what do you think about living in separate domiciles? And she's like, no. I'm like, okay, no negotiating on that one. We'll take that off the table. I'll accept it. I need to compromise on that one. Then I put something else on the table. What do you think about swinging? So so those are hypotheticals, but that's the way that I see things going to ensure that your marriage is happy and you're not just married. So, and I don't believe that there's anything that's too small to be negotiated, whether it's paying the bills to sex to everything else. And evaluating how important those traditional things are really in the success of the marriage. It's like really when you think about it, like how important when you talk about happiness in a successful marriage, really how important are things like the man pumping the gas, holding the door for you, pulling out a chair for you, walking on the outside when you're walking on the street, like I mentioned earlier. I know I've heard some women say that the man, when you're sleeping in the bed, he's supposed to sleep closest to the door just in case somebody breaks in, stuff like that. So there are all of these different weird things that people have that they apply to marriage, apply to successful marriages. When really, when you think about it, are they really that deep? I mean, and can you bend on some of those? Like, for example, if like you say, okay, I want a guy to hold the door for me, but he doesn't necessarily have to pull out my chair. I want a guy to pump my gas, but he doesn't have to sleep with his back to the door. You know, like I said, all of those things are negotiations, at least to me. And I think all of those things should be discussed as opposed to walking into something with a preconceived notion of this is what I have to have. This is the role that you have to fulfill. And I am not bending on that. That's just me. I'm the unmarried one, so hey, what do I know? But I tell you this much: I know a whole lot of divorced men who will pull your chair out for you, but won't do other things that matter more. But that's neither here nor there. Anyway, so shout out to Nina Hartley and her boyfriend from back in the day. I don't know if that boyfriend is her current husband, but regardless, they found something that worked out for them at least at that time. And shout out to everybody in a relationship where the focus is on happiness, mutual happiness, not just yours, not just his, not just hers, but mutual happiness, and not just being married or in a relationship just to be. you know? It's like, so what if your friends think you're crazy and they talk about you behind your back and all of these things? That's just what happens. That's just gonna happen anyway. I'd rather have somebody talking behind my back while I'm happy than somebody talking behind my back when I'm unhappy and stuff like that. So, you have to do what you have to do. I'm all for it. And that's whatever it is. Now, with that said, let me just say for the record, I'm not letting my wife sleep with a rapper while I watch. I'm open minded and we can talk about different sexual things and all of that swinging or whatever, open mindedness. But yeah, I don't know that I can do that. That's a lot. It makes me think of those people that talk about having a hall pass. And for people that don't know what a hall pass is, basically and it's talked about. I don't know anyway, but people basically they have a list of celebrities, for example, and if ever given the opportunity, they can use this hall pass to sleep with that celebrity and not like face the wrath of whatever would happen, like if you just cheated with some random person. It's like I've always heard about that, and I think most people have heard of that, but I wonder if that's a real thing. I wonder if there are actual people who are like, yo, me and my husband, me and my wife, we have hall passes. It just seems like that would be more beneficial to the women because just thinking about myself, I've dated way too many women that have told me at least one story about some celebrity that they've slept with. And men, not so much. It's like a woman can be like, yo, yeah, this happened and I met this dude and it just this led to this and all of this stuff. Because a dude, whether he's a celebrity or not, if you find it doesn't matter anything else, especially if you just giving it up for one night or whatever. He didn't care anything else about you. Whereas a dude, if a dude is fine, like Halle Berry is not just gonna walk up to you and be like, yo, here's my room key, come to my room and all of that stuff. Oh, I wish it did. Anyway, that's all that I have for today. Hopefully, I've encouraged you all to, if you're married, to go to your husband, go to your wife and say, hey, are you happy? Let's reevaluate this marriage thing and talk about what'll make you happy. Yeah, let's put it all on the table and just reorganize or whatever. If you're in a relationship, hopefully the same thing. If you're single like me, hey, we can dream, right? I'm Michael Thomas. Thank you for listening today. You all know how to reach me, Michael at datingwhileadulting.com. And again, tell 50 friends to tell 50 friends and all of that good stuff. As I end every episode, I will pass the mic to Reggie, not like DJ Cassidy, but I'll pass the mic to Reggie and say, Reggie, say goodbye. Reggie didn't say anything, but it's in his heart. So I'll say goodbye for us. You can hit my music. And until next time, thanks a lot. Goodbye.